Ladies and gentlemen, I am honored to have right now, stepping into the NFL Alumni Lounge, Dr. Daniel Amen. Doc, how are you?
Hey, Charlie, I'm doing really great. How are you?
You know how I would describe myself right now, actually? I'd say I'm me, but I'm a bit happier. Be happier. That's what I am right now. So, Doc, last week I had an interview with Dick Butkus. I walk into his house. First thing I see on the coffee table, one of your books. And then we start to talk about your relationship with him and how much you've impacted his life and everything. So the timing was just perfect on this. And I'm happy you're here so we could pick your brain a little bit today.
That makes me so happy.
So how did you meet Butkus in the first place?
A professional I know was seeing him and thought it might be a good idea for him to get a look at his brain. He caused a lot of brain damage.
Right.
And anybody who played in the NFL at that level, clearly that would impact your brain. Your brain is soft, about the consistency of soft butter. Your skull is really hard, and it has sharp, bony ridges. And so people don't really understand the impact of contact sports on people's brains and subsequently on their lives.
Right. And he was saying that when he went in and you did his first scans, all gray, it was all blurry. And he was like, and he even said when you asked him to do the brain scan, he was like, what? For what? And to see him now training with hyperbaric chambers, doing the brain games that you recommend, I mean, it's a day and night. And he said that the impact of working with you totally changed his life.
I love that so much. And, the one thing football players don't know is there's hope to heal. So many of them believe that CTE is permanent, progressive, and untreatable. In fact, I had a big dust-up 2 weeks ago with NPR. NPR did a story on CTE. Okay. And they basically parroted the medical lore that CTE is permanent, progressive, and untreatable. And then they picked on me because I give people hope. And I'm like, you're giving people hope when there's no hope. And I'm like, how the hell do you know that?
Yeah.
It's like I've evaluated, treated 300 NFL players. I mean, cool players like Dick Butkus and Terry Bradshaw and Freddie Dryer and Anthony Davis. And 80% of my players get better. But what they were arguing for is basically doing nothing, because what they said is CTE is an autopsy diagnosis. And that's true, that you really can't diagnose it until you can actually get brain tissue.
Interesting.
But with the SPECT scans we do, I can clearly see if you've had evidence of traumatic brain injury. And then why am I going to wait for you to be dead before I do anything about it? It's like, let's get going. And we have published, and other people have published studies on hyperbaric oxygen therapy, on nutritional supplements. I actually ran an NFL weight loss group. Big Ed White, he ended up losing like 60 pounds. So he was less Big Ed White. And
mid-sized Ed?
I published a study actually on NFL players. So I looked at players, same position, healthy weight versus overweight. And the people who are overweight had significant less activity in their frontal lobes. And, they're eating 4,000 or 5,000 calories a day so they can be big and strong. But when they stop playing, they often don't modify what they're eating and get serious about being healthy. So that's why I'm excited to talk to you. It's like there's way more hope than people know. A lot of people watch the movie Concussion, and I was a consultant on it. And Peter Landesman, who wrote it, actually had written me in the script because he's like, you're the only one I know who give these people hope.
Right.
And then I got written out of the script. So I know the joy of being in and the disappointment of being out. But this is the story of the century. It's even if you've been bad to your brain, you can make it better, and I can prove it.
And that's the reason I've been so interested in you, and the reason I've studied your work. And I think that it's cool when it's discussed amongst the NFL alumni, because that's the vibe I get. Every time I read one of your books, every time I read one of your studies, there's hope to it. It's not just gloom and doom. And, you know, I want to go back to what you were saying about the weight, because one of our main initiatives right now at the alumni is talking about obesity. We have this thing, it's called Huddle Up, Let's Talk Obesity. And I didn't think we'd be talking obesity with each other, but like you said, when an athlete retires, their diet stays the same, but they're not burning the calories. How does that affect the brain?
Well, I published 3 studies that show as your weight goes up, the actual physical size and function of your brain goes down, which should scare the fat off anyone.
Wow.
And given that 72% of Americans are overweight, 42% of us are obese, it's the biggest brain drain in the history of the United States. And, you know, we're in the middle of a pandemic. And everybody knows if you're overweight or obese, you just tripled your risk of dying from COVID.
For sure.
Because in my books, I talk about bright minds. If you want to keep your brain healthy or rescue it, if it's headed for trouble, you have to prevent or treat the 11 major risk factors that steal your mind. If you're overweight or obese, you have 6 of the 11. It's like, oh my goodness. So bright minds. B is for blood flow. You have low blood flow. R is retirement and aging. Your brain looks older than you are. I is inflammation. Fat cells produce something called inflammatory cytokines. And now with the pandemic, everybody knows inflammation's a disaster for brain and body function. T in bright minds is for toxins, and fat cells store toxins, which is why if you lose a lot of weight, you really want to be in a sauna. You want to be detoxifying because your body's releasing all those toxins. N is for neurohormones. Fat cells take healthy testosterone levels, which, by the way, is low in almost all my NFL players because of head trauma. And it turns it into unhealthy cancer-promoting forms of estrogen. So when I learned this connection, because I'd always been sort of a little bit chubby, I have obesity in my family. I lost 25 pounds and I've kept it off.
Wow.
Because I don't want a smaller brain, right? When it comes to the brain, size matters. It's the only organ where size matters, and you want to take care of it.
For sure. So I'd like to talk, because now, so we have something, Doc, called the NFL Alumni Academy. What we're doing, we sign players that were cut or undrafted. We're training them up at the Pro Football Hall of Fame with former players and Hall of Famers, and we're getting guys back into the NFL. So recently we did a deal with a company called Elevate. They provided hyperbaric chambers to the camp. And now our players are, every day after practice, everyone's doing HBOT sessions. So it's something we've really dove into, and it's something that you're the man on. Every time I'm looking up stuff, you're the man. So I was like, oh, we got to bring him on to talk about this. So what kind of benefits do you think there are for athletes using HBOT therapy?
So much. When you put the body under pressure and you increase the level of oxygen, it increases blood flow to the brain. And when I first learned about hyperbaric oxygen, it was about 25 years ago, one of my friends who is a professor at UCLA who did SPECT scans, he said, Dan, look at the SPECT scans before and after hyperbaric oxygen treatment, and you could just see the increased blood flow. And I love that. It also decreases aging markers. It decreases inflammation. it improves the production of stem cells. And your brain produces new stem cells every day, about 700 of them.
Really?
But if you're overweight and you have all this inflammation, it kills those stem cells. If you are eating a lot of processed foods, promoting inflammation kills the stem cells. I have a funny story. It came out last year. I've been Miley Cyrus's doctor for a long time, and she was on Joe Rogan talking about me, and I couldn't get her to stop smoking pot. And she was like the poster person. And I'm like, this is not okay. And then I figured it out. So the hippocampus, there are two thumb-shaped structures on the inside of your temporal lobes. It's called the hippocampus, which is Greek for seahorse, because they're shaped like a seahorse. And every day, your brain produces 700 new hippocampal stem cells, or baby seahorses. And I'm like, you're murdering the babies.
With smoking?
With smoking pot.
Wow.
Decreases every area in the brain. But if you're making these 700 new baby stem cells, you don't want to put them in an environment that's toxic, because then they won't grow. Wow. They won't assimilate into the big hippocampus. So you have a good mood. So you have a good memory. So your spatial awareness is good. So if you think of an NFL player, what do they need? They need reaction time and spatial awareness. Yeah. They also need to remember, right? If I go this way, I'm more likely to tackle the quarterback versus if I don't remember what worked last time.
Yeah, and a playbook this big too.
Cognitive performance. And people don't understand. With a better brain, I'm less likely to get cut because I'm more consistent, I'm more reliable, I'm working at a high level. And so protecting the baby seahorses, protecting your hippocampus, protecting your brain is the smartest way to go, because then when you retire, whenever that is, you have a brain that can look forward to something else. Too often, players, this is like their only goal, and they get depressed when they retire because they haven't been thinking about the future.
Right.
So it basically comes down to this one question. If you love yourself, is this good for my brain or bad for it? And all you have to do is know the lists. And marijuana is bad for the brain. Alcohol is bad for the brain. Nicotine is bad for the brain. Now, we have a high school course called Brain Thrive by 25, where we teach high school and college kids to love and care for their brain. And I think it's like lesson 5. It's like, okay, what to avoid. And invariably it's a boy, it's never a girl, raises his hand and go, how can you have any fun? And a number of my NFL players, and Dennis Rodman, because I have Dennis Rodman's brain, he was one of my fantasy brains. Guys, we have fantasy women. I got to meet Scarlett Johansson, and that was really cool. But I have fantasy brains. And Dennis Rodman was one of my fantasy brains. He's such a good basketball player. It's like, why do you act like that? and then when I was talking to him, he's like, but how can you have any fun? And so I played a game with him called Who Has More Fun? The kid with the good brain or the kid with the bad brain?
Right.
I said, who gets the girl? You got Carmen Electra. And who loses the girl because they don't have a good brain? Who loses Carmen Electra, for God's sakes? Who gets into the college they want, who has the most energy, who has the most mental clarity, who has the most joy. And in You Happier, the book you have, I actually did a study on happiness and shown it's in your frontal lobes, and people who have healthy frontal lobes are happier. And so if you imagine a football player who in generations past was taught to lead with their forehead, right? I played football in high school. I was taught that, which, from a neuroscience standpoint is insane,
Right.
that you want to just protect it.
Was there a whoa moment for you when you started putting the hyperbaric chambers to work?
Well, the whoa moments are the after scans.
Okay.
So, for example, Marvin Fleming was one of our players. He played in 5 Super Bowls. He was on Miami Dolphins' perfect team in 1972. His brain went terrible, and he was overweight. In a hyperbaric chamber, along with the supplements and killing the sugar, his brain was so much younger than he was. And that's what I love. So for me, it's like the pictures matter.
Yeah.
That, we started our study in 2007, and the NFL was in active denial. They had problems. But when I saw Anthony Davis, the Hall of Fame running back from USC, his brain at 54 looked like he was 90, and it was bad for 90. And he had temper problems and memory problems. But he just did my program. A lot of the NFL players are great because they like being coached. 5 months later, he's dramatically better. And then he invited me to the Los Angeles chapter of the Retired NFL Players Association. And I grew up a Ram fan. I grew up in Southern California. And I saw some of the players I'd idolized, and they were depressed and demented. And one player asked me the same question about marijuana 6 times. So it was clear his memory was no good.
Wow.
And I'm like, somebody should do something about this. I mean, when you're an imager like I am, but I grew up Roman Catholic. And so whenever you have this idea somebody should do something, the next thought you have, at least I had, is, well, you should do something.
Right.
And so they co-sponsored my study. And we got so many players interested in being scanned and treated. And I fell in love with them.
Does it make you proud now to see, after all that, like, because I'd consider that time period kind of like a tornado almost. And like once the dust settled and you were able to start doing things and start helping people, and now you see the league evolving, does it make you proud to see now how they're trying to implement change and different tackling styles being taught? Like, you're a big part of that, man.
It does. It makes me really happy. I thought this was going to be a decades-long battle, but by 2011, they admitted that football can cause long-term brain damage. They put concussion posters in every major locker room, and it's changing. Yeah. And I have a nephew who's playing high school, but he's got offered to play at colleges, and he's an offensive lineman, and they're not using their head. Right? They stand up, they use their hands, because I looked at positions, and offensive linemen had the worst brains because it's the thousands of little hits. And they're using their head. I saw Ron Yeri, who is an offensive tackle for USC, and now he's in the Hall of Fame in the NFL. And I'm like, so how many times did you hit your head a game? And he's like, in offense, there's 60 plays, probably 55 times a game. Sure. And Cam Cleland, one of my players, said, it's sort of like you run full speed into a brick wall, and then you do it 30 times. Their brains look vulnerable. And, one of the big ideas that came out of it is, okay, own it. It's a brain damaging sport. Rehabilitate it, and don't wait until you're retired. We should be rehabilitating players the moment they start in Pop Warner. We should teach them this is how you optimize and repair your brain. And it's not just about football players, because every firefighter I've seen have a damaged brain. Huh. Why? Because they inhale toxins when they're fighting fires. They have brain injuries from falls, and they have emotional trauma, right? I mean, you can't take a dead baby out of a building and have that not impact you.
That's with you forever.
I mean, you go to work every day and you spend time with the worst day of their lives. And you do that over and over again. So this work on rehabilitation is not just about football players, but there's 3 million people every year that have a traumatic brain injury. And my hope by working with football players, because everybody knows them, everybody loves them, is to really bring attention to the issue of traumatic brain injury and the consequences, which is often, if you go, hey, Daniel, what's the single most important thing you've learned from looking at 200,000 SPECT scans? That's how many SPECT scans we've done. And what I would say is mild traumatic brain injury ruins people's lives, and nobody knows about it because most psychiatrists never look at the brain.
And it just shows itself in different ways, and they're treating different things. So does it drive you crazy with the amount of drugs that are prescribed to people?
Absolutely. The big winner in the pandemic was the pharmaceutical industry. Mm-hmm. Depression tripled from February of 2020 to August of 2020. So it was already at epidemic levels. It was at 8.5%. The general population, 8.5% of people met the criteria for depression. In August, it was 28%. And people think, well, I'm depressed, so I should take Prozac. And I'm like, no. Depression is like fever. It's like cough. You know, nobody gets a diagnosis of fever or cough or chest pain because it doesn't tell you what's causing it or what to do for it.
Right.
Let's get your life right. First, my NFL players, 4 times the level of depression as the general population. 4 times. Why? Because they hurt the happiness part of your brain, your frontal lobes, right? No matter what position you play, if you have a concussion or you have thousands of subconcussive blows,
right,
it hurts your frontal lobes. And I read Tom Brady's book, TB12, and it's a great book. And the reason he's playing at 45 at a super high level is, yes, he's playing a brain damaging sport, but he does everything else right. He doesn't eat sugar. He doesn't eat processed food. He sleeps 9 hours. He doesn't believe every stupid thing he thinks. He's, you know, I read that book and I'm like, oh, I could have written this book. This is brain health.
Right.
Plus, you know, some of the other techniques he gave. And everybody, if you want to play for a long time, it's your brain that makes the decisions that allows you to continue to play. So as you are helping the players that were undrafted or got cut, you should have a whole module on brain health, because ultimately how you are, how your brain is, determines how fast you are and the decisions you make. And nobody thinks like that. Heck, I didn't think like that until I started looking at the brain.
Well, it takes a certain amount of courage to take a problem hands-on and start dealing with it rather than try to look past it. And I think that's something we see with everything in life. So that's why I have the ultimate amount of respect for a guy like you that's put your hands on it, got dirty with it, and found solutions. If you had your ideal world, right, at what point would you tell athletes that are dealing with these kind of sports, hockey, football, these type of things, to start using hyperbaric chambers?
As soon as they start playing.
Really?
As soon as they are at risk for subconcussive blows, that they should be thinking about a hyperbaric chamber. And it's not just the chamber. They should be thinking about getting rid of the standard American diet, you know, SAD. It's actually a brand new article in Newsweek yesterday, just came out, on how processed and ultra-processed foods are making us fat and unhappy. That the food industry is actually making those things addictive. And I just saw Troy Gloss, the famous baseball player who played for the Angels. We do a series on Instagram called Scan My Brain. Mm-hmm. And I asked him about his diet when he was playing. And he said it was basically ballpark food. You know, it was pizza and hot dogs. And I'm like, how does that make any sense for an athlete making tens of millions of dollars that you're not taking care of their brain? Or I remember it was a 2007 NBA Finals, the Lakers and the Celtics. I mean, I may have the date wrong, but it came out that Lamar Odom was eating $88 of candy a week. And I was a season ticket holder for the Lakers. And so I wrote a piece that got picked up on ESPN about what is the matter with the Lakers that they don't have a nutritionist getting rid, because, you know, Lamar Odom was a space cadet, right? Like Kobe Bryant would throw him the ball, and he was actually not even looking at Kobe Bryant and would miss it and make these I'm like, come on, he's spaced out because of his nutrition. He's, you know, a world-class player, and no one's getting rid of the candy.
Oh, man. This is the wrong season ticket holder. You guys thought Spike Lee was the season ticket holder you didn't want to tick off? It's actually Dr. Raymond. What's been really cool for me reading You Happier was reading about the different brain types and the way it was broken down. It made it cool for a guy like me. I didn't go to medical school. I didn't understand this stuff. And you're someone that I go to because you make it easy, understandable, and then you provide the things, hey, you want to do it better? Here are the changes. That's my favorite thing about these books.
Well, thank you. When I started looking at the brain in 1991, I realized, personality really comes from how your brain works. And I found these 5 types. The balanced brain, these are people, stress, it just sort of rolls off their back. The spontaneous people, these are people that are late, tend to be disorganized, but are very creative and often the life of the party. And the persistent type. And you want your accountant to be like that. I mean, you want them to count the beans, or you want your neurosurgeon to be like that. But if you make them mad, they're going to hold on to that forever. And then there's the sensitive type. They actually did really poorly in the pandemic because they crave connection with other people. And the cautious type. Yeah. The people who tend to be anxious, which is so common. But people often misunderstand anxiety. You need some. People with low levels of anxiety, they go to jail because they make bad decisions, right? They're overweight because they're not really thinking, you know, if I have the third brownie.
Right. You should be thinking
this is not going to be good, right? Yeah. So you need some anxiety. Obviously, too much is trouble for you. And so knowing your type, well, here are the things that tend to make you happy. Like the spontaneous people, they love surprises. The persistent people hate surprises. And so knowing your type, you can sort of create your days that fit for you.
Absolutely. Guys, I don't know if he could also be a dating coach or what, but I think that would also be a gold standard career path for you. You know that?
We've seen so many couples, and I did a study once called the Couples from Hell study. These are couples who fail marital therapy, but still want to be together. And 80%, one or both of them had brain issues.
Wow.
And so I was thinking I'd do a website called brainmatch.com.
That's not bad.
And go, because, you know, with relationships, it's do you fit with the person you're with? It might not be they're good or bad. It'd just be, we don't fit because I need this spontaneity and it has to be the same way for the other partner or he or she's unhappy.
Right. That makes sense. So, Doc, if there's one thing you could tell people right now to do, change it today for a happier you, for a healthier brain, for a healthier you, what would it be?
Well, it's that one question I had mentioned earlier. If you're going to do one thing, in the book, I have lots of tiny habits. You know, it's the smallest thing you can do today that'll make the biggest difference. Well, the mother tiny habit is if you really love yourself, when you go to do something today, just ask yourself, is this good for my brain or bad for it? And if you can answer that with information and love of yourself, love of your family, love of your mission, you're just going to start doing the right things for your brain. The other thing I love is start every day with today is going to be a great day. That way you're focusing, because where you bring your attention always determines how you feel. So I can be furious right now. You know, if I think of the NPR thing, or I think of the people who've criticized me, and I could just be really unhappy.
Right.
Or I could think of, you know, what you told me about Dick Butkus, and that just made me so happy.
Yeah.
And I have to discipline my mind. Just like, see, physical health is a daily practice.
Mhm.
Mental health is the same thing. Brain health is the same thing. It's a daily practice, day in and day out. Let me train my mind to focus on what I love about my life more than what I hate about it.
Absolutely. And guys, if you started the day by pressing play on this interview, well, you just checked off one of the boxes. You started the day off right, baby. Doc, thank you so much for taking the time to catch up with us. And guys, grab a copy of the new book, You Happier, by Dr. Daniel Amen. You will not be disappointed. And you know what? You'll be happier for it. Doc, thank you so much.
Thanks, Charlie. What a joy to spend time with you.